Chapter 9 Year 874 PXF Last Friend's Remembrance. Darkness. Osmond's consciousness floated weightless in a void without light, sound, dimension, or time. A faint spark of awareness, little more than a glimmer of stardust against the vastness of an empty night sky. The spark arced deep within his mind, trying to connect with anything familiar, but there was nothing. It dimmed and went dark again, perhaps for no more than a blink of an eye, or perhaps for an eon. A gentle, muffled sound ignited activity in the darkness once again. A grumbling hum that resolved into a purring melody permeated the black nothingness that enveloped Osmond like a heavy blanket. There was scant tinder upon which the spark could catch hold to bring full wakefulness, but it found a single thought upon which to light a flame. A name. Wilfred.
"That's it, Osmond. Find your way. Let me guide you."
Wilfred's voice was gentle as a summer breeze across a meadow. Osmond didn't so much follow Wilfred's whisper as he let it carry him like a dandelion seed drifting upon a dream. Across the void, the mote of sentience that was Osmond floated indiscriminately. As it traveled, more pieces of himself ignited across the landscape of his mind and joined him until he began to think and to remember. Pain. Unbearable, inconceivable agony. The spark hesitated, cowering. Osmond wanted to retreat back into the blissful nothingness of the dark, but Wilfred's voice intervened.
"'Tis just a memory. 'S not real. You're safe."
There was a pause in the assurances Wilfred's voice offered. Then it continued.
"Your body is free from that now."
The spark voicelessly queried as to what that meant.
"There's much to explain, but first, ye must recover the rest of who ye are,"
Wilfred's voice expounded comfortingly. The spark surrendered to Wilfred's presence and allowed him to carry it further across the mindscape that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. Memory by memory, experience by experience, the spark absorbed its life back into itself, until it became Osmond once again. Still without form, it now could sense weight and dimension and time. Osmond's consciousness drifted before the presence of Wilfred.
"Osmond, can ye speak?"
Wilfred asked. Osmond tried to articulate all the questions he had, but failed. His consciousness had neither lungs to provide breath, nor lips to form words. Wilfred clarified.
"No, not speak. Communicate. Forget about speech and forming words with your mouth. Just project what you want to say." "Wilfred?"
Osmond's voice echoed within his consciousness.
"There you go. It'll be tiring at first. You're very weak, but you are healing."
Wilfred spoke like the cleric who removed Talon's dagger from his lungs.
"Am I dead? Am I in the grove? What happened?"
Osmond's rapid-fire questions left his consciousness weak, and he felt himself fading. Wilfred's presence reached out and somehow infused Osmond's consciousness with energy, stabilizing him.
"I'll explain all I can, but we're both recovering, and I have little energy to spare, so let's not squander it."
Wilfred's presence took what amounted to a breath in this place, and began to explain.
"We're alive, but we're different,"
Wilfred stated without preamble.
"In cleansing you, the serpent's breath destroyed your body 12 times over. No amount of healing energy flowing into you could keep up."
Wilfred paused, seemingly reluctant to revisit the memory of all he had witnessed. With a haunted voice, he said, "'Twas like a stream trying to quell a volcano. The unleashed power of all the emotion ye had locked away overwhelmed your father's sacrifice returning to you." Osmond shied away from the memory as the torture he had endured flashed across his mind. Even Osmond, as just an incorporeal spark of consciousness, perceived the outflowing of care and empathy from Wilfred's presence as he spoke.
"I couldn't bear it any longer, so I stepped into the serpent's breath to shield you from it. And that's when whatever the designs that deities, fiends, and fate had imprinted on your father's sacrifice began their work.
In a questioning tone, as though he was still trying to make sense of everything that happened, Wilfred surmised.
Even the Serpent Guardian of the Inception seemed overpowered by the forces at work, its breath no longer fully under its control.
Wilfred addressed Osmond directly.
The Guardian's breath redoubled in force, and your Oldani body distended and contorted beyond anything that had come before. Your tormented screams became tortured, inhuman howls punctuated by roars of anguish. The serpent's power, your father's sacrifice, and the forces imprinted on that parasitic chain ignited around you in an arcane tempest. It swept me along like a raindrop in a hurricane. Whether I was accidentally entangled in their purpose or the catalyst for it, I cannot fathom.
Wilfred paused.
But everything in that storm of fate, magic, elements, and the gods flooded into your tortured form and merged with it. Including me,
Wilfred added after a pause. Osmond could not comprehend what Wilfred was telling him. It made even less sense than his current predicament as a formless spark of consciousness hovering near the presence of Wilfred in this infinite space.
Where are we then?
Osmond asked. Trying to fit the pieces together, he intuited.
Wilfred, are you in my mind? In my body? It's a tad more complicated than that, lad. It's better to show you bit by bit than to try to explain the little I know,
Wilfred confessed.
I need you to reach out and connect with your body. Not your physical body, but your body here, in this place, with us.
Osmond tried to do what Wilfred asked, confused about how to differentiate. He reached with his consciousness, attempting to feel the weight of his limbs, or the residual pain and ache from the serpent's breath. What he sensed was unfamiliar, misshapen, and distorted. Osmond instinctively recoiled from it.
Not there, Osmond. That's the real world, and what lies there will come soon enough,
Wilfred gently guided.
Look for your body as you knew it, as it once was.
Osmond was shaken by Wilfred's words. What was waiting for him in the real world? What did this mean for the life ahead of him? Wilfred's gentle push on Osmond's consciousness redirected his scattered focus. Osmond tried to reach out again, but every attempt drew him back to the deformed flesh Wilfred had steered him away from. How could Osmond find the body he once had while he was filled with dread and suffocated by what he might now be? He felt like he was drowning just below the surface of the truth, but unable to break through. The effort he was using and the rising panic in his mind began to drain his strength. As his consciousness faded, one sentence cut through his dimming awareness.
Look to your own boat, Osmond.
The painting. His father's masterpiece, hidden on a cave wall high in the mountains of the shield wall spine, became Osmond's lighthouse. He turned away from the imagined water's surface that trapped him, and followed the beacon of Tavi's love for the son he never knew. As Osmond remembered each line and stroke of the image, it was as though he was painting his flesh into existence in this place. However, to his surprise, his mental brushstrokes were not painting a body around his consciousness as intended, but off in the distance, somewhere up ahead. Osmond's consciousness drifted toward where he knew his rediscovered body lay. As the last details of the flesh he painted fell into place on the body ahead of him, he felt a tingling around his consciousness. An ethereal version of his imagined body shimmered into existence around his naked mind, finally giving him form and dimension in this place.
Ah, there you are.
Osmond heard Wilfred's voice come from beside him. Heard with ears from a point in space outside himself, instead of just sensing it in his mind.
You can open your eyes now.
Osmond opened his newfound eyes, having not realized they were closed. His ghostly form actually seeing the surroundings for the first time. As his eyes swept across the blank mindscape before him, his sight acted like a giant paintbrush, leaving behind a melange of color, shape, and motion without reason or proper form. The swaths of jumbled reality his gaze created faded just as quickly from his peripheral vision once his attention moved beyond his eyes' focus. The only constants were himself, Wilfred standing beside him, and a humanoid-sized crystalline chrysalis floating within arm's reach before him.
"You'll get used to it, lad,"
Wilfred intoned.
"Reality is a bit what you make of it here. But some things are persistent regardless of what you wrap around them."
Wilfred's shimmering willico-like form motioned to the chrysalis before them. Through its semi-opaque surface, Osmond saw his body. Not as he imagined it in the painting, smiling in his dueling armor, but broken and battered, the clothes he had been wearing in the clearing shredded to less than rags. Every instinct yelled in Osmond's mind to look away, but his ruined flesh held him transfixed. He remembered the time he had found a mauled elk while exploring the woods around Horizon's End. Antlers torn off, legs broken, neck snapped, and bleeding out. Somehow still alive, drawing in ragged breaths, eyes wild with fear. Osmond had been 11 years old, overwhelmed with pity for the massive creature enduring so much pain and filled with anxiety before him. He knew quickly ending the elk's misery would be a kindness, but he stood frozen, joints and limbs petrified by the keel of his pity and indecision. Osmond's body in the chrysalis was in a similar condition as the elk's. Breath shallow and face in a rictus of pain, gaping wounds showing bone, sinew, and the organs beneath. Limbs broken and brutally twisted out of their sockets. Somehow still living, but a vessel incapable of life. Osmond's ghostly form stood before the chrysalis that encased his physical body, frozen just as he had been all those years ago in front of the elk. At that moment, he realized he felt the petrification of pity's keel weighing on his incorporeal limbs as he looked down at his broken flesh. The keel and emotion of that memory from his childhood and Horizon's End was no longer numb to him. Osmond lifted the arms of his spirit form to feel the reawakened, dusty grinding of his joints affected by keel. As his forearms came into view, he recognized the wounds upon them and realized what encased his consciousness in this place was his soul. Written upon his shimmering arms were the open wounds of the ritual Osmond had inflicted upon himself to excise his father and home a decade ago, now cleansed and no longer festering. The harm he inflicted upon himself then was not a mirror of the overwhelming trauma imparted on his physical flesh resting in the chrysalis before him. However, it was the cause of all his corporeal self had endured. Osmond examined his soul self as easily as one might assess the fit of a new tunic. He saw carved into his forearms the 18 slashes mirroring the marks on the log above his bed at Horizon's End that he had added after Anson's departure. Looking down past his forearms, Osmond saw his feet. Where wonder had once danced, his toes were blackened and desiccated, as though from frostbite. Channels etched the surface of his legs and arms like rivers cutting through a desert. They ran from his extremities to the heart of the injury he had inflicted upon his soul, the gaping hole in his chest. In that central place was where Horizon's End and his father's memory had lived, before the ritual he undertook cut them out. Osmond could imagine the nightmare the wound must have been when it was festering and swallowing his every emotion. Its ichor oozing across his soul, carving channels in his soul's flesh as it spread to consume him. The crater in his torso was no longer empty, however. His fingers encountered shimmering, spider-like filaments of his healing soul that stretched across the wound's cavernous void that he dared not disturb. Osmond might be beginning to be able to feel again, but he was far from being whole. His hand drifted to his soul's face, knowing the number of emotions he had lost that manifested their sensations there. He looked to Wilfred.
How bad is it?
Osmond asked tentatively.
I won't lie to you. You might want to hold off on taking a look until you have healed more,
Wilfred stated as neutrally as possible, but Osmond could see the pain behind his eyes. To his credit, Wilfred had never averted his gaze or turned away, always looking him straight in the eyes as they spoke.
The serpent said those in his grove must face their trauma to heal,
Osmond stated introspectively.
I did this to myself, and I need to see it. Can you show me? Aye, I can show you,
Wilfred confirmed. Osmond felt his consciousness separate from his soul and move across the space between himself and Wilfred, merging with the Willico. Osmond then found himself seeing through Wilfred's eyes, looking up at his soul from the Willico's slightly lower perspective. From this vantage point outside himself, Osmond saw that the wound in his torso was far more grievous than he perceived with his own eyes. It encompassed nearly the entirety of his soul's core. Had there been daylight in this place, he was sure it would have been visible through what little substance remained at the far side of the gruesome tunnel through his chest. The channels Osmond had noticed carved into his arms and legs were more profound and numerous across his chest and running up his neck, finally reaching his head. Osmond's face, the visage of his soul, was a horror dreamed up from the nightmares of the night of the drowned moon. Barely recognizable even to himself, the smiling countenance of his father's painting was reduced to a withered wraith split by gaping wounds and splintered bone. Osmond's gaze traveled from feature to feature, taking in every horrifying detail, cataloging the damage he saw with its corresponding lost emotion.
Will I heal?
Osmond asked Wilfred tentatively.
The guardian of the Inception promised that all flesh and souls heal with time and rest. Which brings us to our situation,
Wilfred explained. In a blink, Osmond was back in his own form, seeing with his eyes and looking down at Wilfred. A profound gratitude overcame Osmond, seeing only loving concern in Wilfred's eyes, knowing full well the horror his friend confronted with an unflinching expression. Without Wilfred, he would be going through this alone, or not at all. His cresting emotions and all else he had experienced since awakening sent a wave of exhaustion over Osmond, almost making him swoon.
That's probably enough for today. Your healing has just begun, and as you saw, there is still a long way to go for both your soul and flesh.
Wilfred's voice took on a gentle but firm bedside manner.
Let's get you comfortable.
Osmond suddenly found himself in his room at the Sojourn's Rest, his freshly made bed calling out to him. The din of the tavern below vibrated through the walls, and if he concentrated, he could hear Talon's rumbling snores echoing from his adjacent suite of rooms. As he curled into the familiar bed and consciousness left him, Osmond heard Wilfred say,
I'll wake you again soon to give you the rest of the tale.
Osmond dreamed of a lone Saldrig, sitting on a snow-covered ridge, with eyes to the sky, the Solenfell's secrets and truths open before its glowing eyes.